Just choke on my cough.
That's okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to have with us the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, Congresswoman Karen Bass. Welcome to Make It Plain, Congresswoman. How are
Thank
you
you.
today?
Doing good, thank you.
Wonderful. Well, first of all, let me ask about home. There's so many. It's like we're living in biblical times with all the crises. Let me ask about home. What's going on with the fires?
Well, you know what? California used to have a fire season. Now it seems like it could be any month in the year. And the other thing that is so frightening is that people are dying in these fires now, and that just didn't used to be the case. But, if we're not going to address climate, then we shouldn't be surprised we'll be facing these situations. California has been in the forefront of addressing climate change, but we need our nation to do that as well.
Is there anything on the national level, even in the House or Senate, that would make California better equipped to tackle what's going on right now?
Yes, first and foremost, passing the HEROES Act, because the bill that we passed out of the House more than 100 days ago that has been languishing in the Senate has resources for state and local entities, local governments. So that means firefighting, that means first responders in terms of healthcare, teachers. And so, yes, that is the most important thing that can happen now in terms of supporting us in addressing the fires.
Um, and obviously that's something that definitely needs to happen. Also, we're hearing about the hurricanes as well.
Exactly. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens, whether or not my Republican colleagues will be willing. Maybe that will help them pass the HEROES Act, really, because in the bill, there's money for state and local governments. And apparently that's one of the biggest points of contention with the Republicans. They, for whatever reason, do not want to provide resources to their own states.
Yeah. And people are obviously suffering. Of course, what's front of mind, I think, for everyone, Congresswoman, is what's going on in Wisconsin. First of all, your reaction to that horrendous video.
Well, you do ask yourselves, when will it end? When will they just stop? And when will action be taken? So, the other bill that's languishing in the Senate is the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. But let me just say that everybody saw what happened in Wisconsin, but remember Louisiana. Remember Trayford Pellerin, I believe is the pronunciation of his last name. He was shot 11 times in his back and he's dead. So we had 2 shootings within 3 days of each other. One resulted in massive protests, the other one didn't. We need to remember them both. And we need to say that until we pass legislation that is transformative, these situations are going to continue.
And that legislation would be the Senate passing what the House already passed, correct?
Yes, because let me just tell you about 2 features in that bill, okay? One is taking away the officer's ability to have immunity. So they will kill people with impunity, just like the guy did who choked George Floyd to death. He's looking straight at the camera while he's killing someone. And he clearly had no concern about being arrested. So taking away the immunity and then also lowering the standard to prosecute, because right now the standard to prosecute an officer is so high, no one ever gets prosecuted. And so those are just 2 examples of the law that needs to change. Both of those examples are in the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act.
Yeah, and that's necessary. What's your reaction to the news of late that we have this gentleman, Mr. Rittenhouse, who's the alleged shooter on the ground in Kenosha? It's also alleged, well, if he's the shooter, we know there's video of him at Trump rallies and support for Donald Trump. What do you make of that, Congresswoman Bass?
Well, first of all, to me, he's a vigilante. He's a domestic terrorist. You see the video with him with his rifle, his high-powered rifle. He's holding up his hands, walking toward the police. Now, can you imagine if that was a black man?
Right, of course.
Can you imagine if that was a black person at the rally with an AR-15 rifle and the police going, "Oh, okay, how are you doing over there?" He would have been shot dead immediately. And so I think that it's the type of vigilantism that, in my opinion, is encouraged and promoted by the president. In fact, if you listen to the chief of police or sheriff, whatever law enforcement leader, had a press conference, he basically said, well, if people had abided by the curfew, this would have never happened. And that gentleman with the gun who was trying to resolve something, are you kidding me? He killed 2 people. That's the way you refer to somebody who is non-law enforcement, who shoots somebody down at a rally. I mean, it's incredible. I feel like I've been in a time machine and I'm back in the 1940s.
It's, you know, and the police chief was talking about, Congresswoman, he even suggested that Rittenhouse came out there to resolve the situation. Right. The police didn't even react to him.
Right.
And it's almost as if I saw the video correctly, there were people, black people specifically, saying to the police, flagging the police down, saying this guy shot someone. And it was almost as if their voices were just ignored because of the color of their skin.
Right.
And he was allowed to roam around because he's white.
Well, if he was a white man with a gun, there must have been some legitimate reason for him to be there. Right. If it had been, I mean, and you're talking about, first of all, a child, he's 17 years old. He is not a law enforcement officer, didn't even live in the area, walking down the street with a high-powered rifle, with his hands up, marching toward the police, and the police do absolutely nothing.
Yeah. It's really scary. Do you think that Donald Trump wants this, that he is capitalizing off chaos?
Without question. His whole campaign is based on law and order, this fiction of cities being completely out of control. Now, you and I know that there have been hundreds, if not thousands, of marches since the murder of George Floyd, and 99% of them have been peaceful. The ones that have gotten out of control, that is unfortunate. I most certainly don't support that. But I also raise questions when I do see the violence as to who's committing the violence, because we know there are examples of where the violence was committed by white supremacist organizations. As a matter of fact, last night at the Republican convention, Vice President Pence made mention of an African-American woman whose brother was murdered at one of the protests in Oakland. And he talked about his murder. Well, it turned out that the person that killed him was in a white supremacist organization, the Boogaloo Boys, who deliberately went to the protest, infiltrated the protest to make it look like it was the protesters. I'm sure you saw that video of a young white man in Minneapolis who had himself completely covered so you couldn't see his racial identity. You saw him busting out windows. And then as he was leaving away, he pulled his hood down and you could see that it was a white man. So there are attempts to make this look like, number one, it's the protesters. And then even in Portland, Oregon, where they might be protesters, but the character has changed and it's predominantly white. So I worry about the Black residents of Portland who probably are going to be blamed for the violence that they're not even participating in.
Yeah. And I think we've seen that in a lot of these situations, there are agents provocateurs.
Right.
Who make it look like it's us and it's not us at all. Do Trump and Pence, I mean, is this the only way to gin up their base to kind of cosplay some type of civil war?
Well, I think their strategy is to go after the white vote, a percentage of the white vote to consolidate their core, to try to peel off a small percentage of the black vote and to suppress the rest. So now taking such extreme examples of the post office, aside from making people risk their lives to vote, closing down polling stations so people have to travel further in order to deliver their vote, making it impossible to get a ballot. You have to have an excuse to want to vote safely at home. So they're going through all sorts of voter suppression tactics, and at the same time trying to gin up their base by saying that all hell is breaking loose in cities and that they need a law and order campaign. So he has resurrected the ghost of Joe McCarthy by saying that everybody is a socialist, and George Wallace by running a campaign that's based and rooted in racism.
Congressman Bass, I have to ask you this. Obviously, you were one of the front runners to be selected as Joe Biden's running mate. I'm sure disappointment isn't the right term, but what does it feel like to go through that process? And then to have your colleague from your great state to be chosen?
Well, first of all, I am extremely proud of our vice presidential candidate, Kamala Harris, who has done an exemplary job as our senator, attorney general, and district attorney in San Francisco, who has been a history maker and a trailblazer every step of the way. So I have been very excited to see her ascend to that level. To me, to go through the process was an incredible honor. To even have been considered was an amazing honor. And I think that it was a moment in our history that so many amazing women were up for consideration. And I was, I was there when Vice President Biden said he was going to put a woman on the ticket when we were in South Carolina, and that was a very exciting moment. So I am counting, it's now 68 days away, and we need to do everything we can to make sure that we see history in January with the swearing in of Vice President Kamala Harris. And I have to tell you, yesterday we had a meeting of the Congressional Black Caucus, and we all were on Zoom, of course, since we can't be physically in a room, and we did a toast to Kamala, and it's a source of pride for us because next year is the 50th anniversary of the Congressional Black Caucus, and we can say with pride that we have sent two people to the White House. We sent a president and soon to be vice president.
That is something. So obviously Trump too is, and with Russia's help and
Yes.
unfair bots and trolls,
How about that?
Congressman Bass, they're targeting Black men.
Right.
And I wonder if you can help with this. One of the ways they're targeting Black men is by distorting Senator Harris's record as a prosecutor in California. And I mean, you've been right there too.
Yeah.
Is anything you can share to generally address, that not only that tactic, but also speak to those who are victimized or targeted by some of this disinformation?
Well, first of all, look who's making the charges. Someone who has disrespected Black people for generations. I mean, second generation. Donald Trump and his father were sued by the federal government for discriminating against Black people. What he's had to say about Black people in terms of his business. And since he's gotten there, the way he has characterized our communities, I think we cannot allow ourselves to be confused and betrayed by somebody like him. And then you're going to malign Kamala Harris for her role as the Attorney General. She has a long history of fighting for criminal justice reform. And she wrote a book called Smart on Crime, where she believed that the resources should be put into prevention. And there are very specific things that we know to prevent crime, and that's where the resources should be spent. But I think that we have to make sure that our community is not confused. Now, granted, they trotted out 4 or 5 Black people at their convention, but we have to make no mistake. We have to look at the policies that this man has put in place since he has been in office. And from day one, those policies hurt Black people. Rolling back consent decrees on police departments so that they weren't held accountable. getting rid of programs, civil rights programs in each of the federal agencies every single time that hurts Black people. So we cannot be confused about this. I forgot to add in the foreign intervention. So the foreign intervention also targets Black people by telling Black people that their votes don't count, that the Democrats are just as bad, really trying to sow confusion. One thing that Black people do though, when we get mad, we get busy.
That's
and
right.
So the idea that somebody would try to trick you, to me, should be a lot energizing to say, how dare you disrespect me like that? I'm gonna go out and I know who to vote for.
It's interesting. There's no equivalent to Hillary's emails in this cycle.
Right.
So they're trying to make stuff stick. They can't get Ukraine to stick to Biden. And then how are you going to talk about law and order and then at the same time accuse the ticket with a prosecutor on it of being soft on crime? So it's like they don't really know what to do.
Wait a minute. We're going to talk about soft on crime? This is a man who everybody he's been associated with has been indicted. Some of them are in prison. You want to talk about soft on crime? He's somebody who doesn't believe the law applies to him. We watch him break the law every day. Tonight, he will accept the nomination from the White House. That is a violation of the Hatch Act. Down the street from the White House is the Trump Hotel, where he violates the emoluments clause almost on a daily basis. So he can't hardly talk about law and order. And then let me just tell you something. If he cared an ounce about us, then give us the COVID data, because 178,000 dead Americans, you and I know there is a large percentage of those that look like you, and they do not want the data told. Why don't we know the breakdown as to who those 178,000 people are? Now the White House wants the data. The White House is also trying to capture the census data in a way that is going to reduce the numbers of people that are counted. Why are they doing that? Because they're talking about consolidating power for the next 10 years. And if they grab the census data and undercount intentionally our communities, then we will lose representation.
Do we have any recourse against what they're doing with the Postal Service? I know there are probably going to be more hearings. Well, there were hearings this week. There'll probably be more. Do we have any recourse to try to get that back on track?
Well, I think that we were able to stop the bleeding, but we haven't repaired the wound. So in other words, we got them to stop removing the sorting machines, to stop removing the blue boxes. But the blue boxes and the sorting machines that they already removed, we have not been able to get them to put them back. As a matter of fact, they're now saying that they basically destroyed them. I mean, who does this? If you look at what's going on in this country from a global perspective, we look ridiculous. I mean, a lot of what I do is focus on Africa. And I'm supposed to go over and tell African countries, well, don't hire your family, don't cheat in an election, don't try to change the election day. We don't have a leg to stand on internationally.
Right. Lastly, just before we came on, you and I were chatting a bit about HR 40. In fact, I'm in a few minutes when we leave, I'll be on the weekly strategy session with judiciary staff. I think we're over about 150 co-sponsors, more and more coming on. It looks like that legislation is building up some steam, and Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee is hoping we may be able to even bring it to a vote in the House before the end of the year. Do you think our chances are pretty good?
I do. I do think our chances are good because we're at a moment in our country which, I hate that it is the result of the deaths of people, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, the people that have been killed since George Floyd. But I think with all of the protests, and this is the first time I've seen this that I can recall, people are now saying systemic racism. In the past, people wouldn't even connect the shooting of Black people with racism at all. And so now that we're beginning to examine our history, it is the moment to say, 256 years of enslavement. And we don't want to talk about the consequences of that. We don't want to look at how that impacted a population. And then there was the 100 years after enslavement of US apartheid. The South Africans came over here and studied Jim Crow before they instituted apartheid in South Africa. And so we need to look at the history of discrimination. And to me, to look at systemic racism, we need to look at each of our institutions and say what in these institutions are barriers to people of color.
Tomorrow, anniversary of the March on Washington. We'll all be in Washington, D.C. I think I heard you might make it back. I don't know if you actually make it to be with us at the Lincoln Memorial, but I know you're a supporter.
Of course.
We want to promote the George Floyd Policing Act. Let me commend you. You mentioned Africa, your work on Africa, your work on behalf of Africa. We appreciate that continuing. And let me just also say, I complimented you greatly when Chris Dodd said what he said about Kamala Harris. And I thought it was very upstanding the way you defended your colleague, even though you were also in the running for the same job. And I just wanted to commend you for that, because that said a lot about your stature. And I say that to a lot of people. That's why Karen Bass is in the running and why she's important to us all. So
we can't let people pit
that's right.
us against each other. And so when the media attempted to do that, well, we said no. Kamala and I talked about it. We were not going there. It's not unusual for people to go for the same position. There's no reason for it to result in attacks on each other.
Yeah, we can't let them divide us, for sure. Right. Congresswoman Bass, such a pleasure to speak with you, and we thank you for joining us, and thank you for all your hard work on behalf of us all.
Absolutely. Thank you for your work.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. Take care now. All right.